Jamie Wong. I am the Special Education Policy Director at the Louisiana Department of Education. You all are here today because you have a vested interest in Louisiana special schools. And as you probably all know, last summer we began as the Department of Education a process to seek an external evaluator to come in and give us some information about all three of our special schools here in Louisiana. The School for the Deaf, the School for the Visually Impaired, and the Louisiana Special Education Center, which is up in Alexandria, and serves students who have orthopedic and complex health and medical needs. All public schools run by the special school district here in Louisiana. As a state agency, we've had concerns about these environments and wanted to make sure as a state we are providing educational opportunities to every student so they can maximize their educational experience and reach their fullest potential as students and citizens in our state. So we put out what is called a request for proposals. That is the formal process for identifying the person who would have come in to conduct this evaluation. Many of you probably in December or throughout December, January, and February as this evaluation team were conducting their review, probably either met with them or had some sort of conversation with them about one of the three schools, whichever is the most particular interest for you. We very much appreciate that feedback. I know they do as well. What we are here today to do is to receive the findings and recommendations that were part of that evaluation process. So this morning, the team from all across the country has come together. They met with the Department of Education this morning and shared with us the findings and recommendations that we asked for them throughout this evaluation process. Today they are sharing it with you all as advocates here in Baton Rouge who are interested in this information. And tomorrow we will share the same information in Alexandria. There is a lot that they will cover in this report. They will speak to you about each of the three schools. They'll speak to you about the special school district and give you a lot of information about what is currently happening in these environments and what could potentially happen in these environments to make sure that all three of them are centers of excellence for students in Louisiana. Once we have completed the process of going to all of our communities and sharing this information, we wanted to make sure that all stakeholders who are interested in this had an opportunity to hear directly from the experts who have pulled this information together. My boss, Superintendent John White, will be taking all of this information into consideration and going to the State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, which many of you may know as BESE. We'll be going to the BESE board meeting next Monday is when they are meeting with an overview of what we as a state learned throughout this evaluation process and how we believe we can best address the findings and recommendations in this report moving forward. So today you will receive a lot of information. There's a lot of very important things for everybody to think very critically about. And we will also be in that same position as a state agency where we are digesting this information. And we'll be coming to the board next week on Monday to share our plan for moving forward. So with all of that said, I am going to hand the floor over to our evaluation teams to give you an introduction of who they are and share their information with you. We will be, as I said before, this is being recorded, and so we will be making sure that any questions the audience asks at the end of the presentation are also reflected. And Jeff, our colleague from the American School for the Deaf, will be sort of making sure that is appropriately captured on the camera up here in front. So I'm going to hand it over to Lauren, who is leading the evaluation team here, and she will take it over.
Yeah. Thank you. This is an amazing turnout. It doesn't surprise me because the passion we saw in all of these schools and the people working in these schools was so evident, and this exemplifies that. So thank you all for the time that you spent with us when we were here in December. Thank you to those who have sent information to us, who we talked to on the phone, who are sitting here today. You guys have been awesome, and we're going to present findings and recommendations today, but please know it's the skeleton of what we're seeing or what we're suggesting you change. There's a bigger picture of what's great about you, which we'll talk about, but our charge for today was to look at our recommendations. And so there's, again, I want to say there's a bigger picture. There's going to be a larger report out of this that talks more about the positives. The findings and recommendations are what we're looking for you to change. So please, I want you to put it in that context. But before I introduce our team, let's just see who's here. Can you please raise your hand if you're a student? Great. Can you raise your hand if you are a parent? What about school staff? You guys win. What about community members? Okay, so now you know who's here. Let me tell you who we are. I know that's impossible to read, sorry. It's a big room. So anything that's on the screen, we'll make sure that we're saying it. So don't worry. But there are 4 organizations who did this review. I'm from an organization called the Urban Special Education Leadership Collaborative. It's out of EDC, Education Development Center. And we have like a national professional learning community of the 90 largest school districts in the country. So that's what I do, and I also do these types of reviews. We also have Krista Macari here from the Cotting School, which is akin to LSEC, not the same, but akin to it. We have Ed Basso here from Perkins School for the Blind, again, akin to LSBI. And we have Jeff Braven here from ASD, American School for the Deaf, akin to LSD. So we have the 4 of us here, but there were many other people working on this work. We had other people on the ground with us in December and other people working behind the scenes. And the reason we have this large group is to make sure that we had the correct experts on the ground looking. And again, we are providing you with what we hope are recommendations that can just make you soar. Because we truly, truly believe that the 3 schools could be centers of excellence, and more than that, SSD as a whole can be a center of excellence for the state and the country. I mean, we think that you have so much there to build on, and you're very impressive. But we're going to talk right now about recommendations. So, just so you know our charge was in their request for proposal. There were 7 questions. And I'm just going to give you snippets of what the 7 questions were that we were supposed to address. So we're looking at the service delivery models, we're looking at staffing, we were looking at use of funds, the graduation pathways, the role that the schools play in the full continuum of special education services in the state, the students that come to these schools, checking to see if they are, checking to see, sorry, this is our 4th presentation today? I'm getting a little tongue-tied, this is our 4th presentation. But checking to see if the entrance and exit criteria is appropriate for the students. And then action steps on how to create or how to move the recommendation. So that was our charge. And I'm going to share with you our overarching findings. I'm going to share with you 10 overarching findings, and then we're going to go through each one. We're going to go through each one in detail, but I want you to know that these findings all work together. So working on one is not going to change the whole system. They need to be thought of together. So we're going to go through each one, but please keep in mind the comprehensive picture of what we're talking about. Okay? Our charge was to look at the 3 schools. And when we started our work, we realized pretty quickly that what we needed to look at in our findings and our recommendations really focused on SSD as a whole. So we wanted to talk about SSD as a whole. So our first finding, our first recommendation, it's really too small to see out there, is that the leaders of SSD and the schools must have the appropriate level of expertise. Must have the appropriate level of expertise with low incidence disabilities and also with change management. Do you mind switching to the second is outside of the appropriate level of expertise in SSD and in the schools, there needs to be expertise outside to guide and advise, both this SSD, the schools, and the state. We are going to talk to you about decision making. making sure that your decision-making for pedagogical and instructional decisions are closer to the students, and your operational decision-making is more in the management structure. We're going to talk to you about allocating resources more strategically. We're going to talk to you about where the schools meet on the continuum. We think that the schools have a very, very important place on the continuum of special ed services. And we think you can be models of excellence for the state and for the nation, actually. We're going to talk about the need for staff recruitment and retention plans. And we heard that, I'm sure everybody knows that it's hard to find staff to teach kids with low incidence disabilities. We're also going to talk about SSD, and this is, again, everything I've talked about right now is SSD as a whole. And we're going to talk about the fact that SSD needs to provide guidance to help the schools create more transition planning, a larger focus on student independence, we heard that a lot, on residential school connections, on the emergency response systems that you have, and on developing a professional school culture. We're also then going to talk about the schools needing a vision and a mission. The schools need to have their own visions and missions, and high academic standards, of course, that provide options for all the students to participate. And we're saying that when those recommendations are followed, we, again, want to stress that we believe that the 3 schools can be centers of excellence, and SSD as a whole can be the center of excellence for the state of Louisiana and beyond, because you have a structure in place that would allow that. Okay, one thing I want to just say before we move on, because we have a lot to go through, we're going to ask that you hold your questions to the end. I know holding questions means you forget them sometimes, so write them down, hold them to the end, except if you have a clarifying question to what we're talking about. Okay? So now I'm going to let Jeff take over. Oh, sorry, Jeff. Talk about this, I forgot about that.
Am I in video?
I
can do that. I can explain this thing structure. First of all, I'm happy to be back in Louisiana. It's a little bit warmer than where we just left. We're expecting about 18 inches of snow up there. I want to be clear, this is essential, that we will be going through these, and we'll be talking about the Louisiana Special School District. Louisiana Department of Ed, and then you have the special education, special school district, and then you have LSD, LSDI, and LSEC under that. So that's your structure. You've got the 3 schools. We'll be talking about each of the schools later. Right now, this is SSD that we're looking at, which is a special school district. So first, we're going to start with SSD, and then we'll address each of the specific schools. Remember, when we came, when the DOE, it was Louisiana Department of Ed is really nice. I don't know if any other state would really do the intensive study of how to serve these populations, deaf, blind, and deafblind. You're really lucky your state decided to do that. And this study doesn't mean that we're here to criticize and destroy your system. The purpose of the study is to figure out how to improve it. Obviously, the state's committed. So the team came to take a look at how we could transform the schools. And some of these things may look extremely negative, but don't look at it that way, because honestly, the schools are amazing. The district and the state is committed, which is also amazing, but our job was to find ways to improve the schools and the special school district. So that's what this is all about. Okay, so we have the 3 schools, the staff, the students, the people there. Their involvement is awesome. But when you take a look at the whole, there's some issues that need to be improved upon. For example, one of the findings is the leadership of the special district. The leaders are good, but their expertise in deafness, blindness, or special ed is lacking. You need a person up there that understands these populations. And that will help the communication amongst all the different stakeholders. It feels a little bit like a battle right now, but having people with the expertise would help with that issue. Each of these directors of each of the schools should be experts on that population. If I'm running the school for the deaf, I must understand deaf education, language acquisition, and the needs of those students. And the same goes for the visually impaired schools and the LSCE. Once you have the structures in place that are correct, the schools will be able to thrive. But otherwise, you have people trying to explain that aren't able to understand, so the structure is crucial.
Good.
So if you have the right structure, that will cause the academic rigor to improve. So the leadership is crucial to that. Now, you've got the expertise in place, but the person above them, is that person expert in all of these 3 low incidence populations? We feel not. So we think you need an advisory board. You need deaf people on this advisory board that could provide support to school for the deaf. And blind people for the blind school, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to have that expertise, and they could provide the support to SSD and Louisiana Department of Education as Bessie, but you need the right type of experts to provide support for the entire system. So right now, I mean, you're not the only state this is happening in. There's many of them. The bureaucracy is very typical. You want something, you have to ask the person above you. They say, hang on, I've got to ask my boss. That person has to ask their boss. And approval could take 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, or longer. There should be correct policies and procedures whereby the people who are closest to the students, principals, assistant principals, directors of the school, they can make decisions much more quickly. Just make the decision, move on. It's not like they need to ask the boss that tells them wait, ask their boss, etc. Of course, some things, budgetary, etc., may take longer because they'll need more approval from higher up, but there's other things that can happen more quickly if you empower the people that are in charge, that are closer to the students. The operations of the schools. You have 3 schools. How can you save money? You can create some sufficient efficiencies. You can have 1 human resources for 3 schools, maybe 1 business office. I think some efficiencies could be created for all of these schools instead of everybody having their own people, everything being done separately. You know, it's like we don't do that here, but we do that in this school. Once everybody is unified and on the same page, speaking the same language, that will impact morale, academic rigor, and a whole host of other things. So I was talking about those 4 issues, and then the other team members will talk about more of them, and then I'll come back and talk specifically about the School for the Deaf.
Good afternoon again. Thank you all for coming out. It's great to see so many people engaged in this process. I'm Ed Bosso, Superintendent Perkins. I'm going to talk about 3 areas. I'm going to talk about strategic allocation of resources, sort of placement on the continuum of services, and then lastly about staff recruitment and retention. But I'll echo what both Lauren and Jeff had said. This is an opportunity for us to give feedback on things that need some work, in our opinion, from what we observed, from the data that we read, and an opportunity for you to take those, look at them, consider them, and move that forward in a way to make your school better. We saw lots of great stuff, so I'm not going to repeat all that, but we saw, I don't want, when we do findings or recommendation, it feels like, man, this is a negative report. Well, it's not meant to be a negative report. It's meant to call out the things that can improve. So when we look at strategic allocation of resources, in our findings, we basically didn't see what we would say is a strategic plan with priorities, clear priorities, and then with those priorities, you would take and allocate your resources to those priorities. We also saw that there are many capital needs, building needs, facilities needs, maybe, that are competing with the needs that are tied to instruction or operations and instruction. And no one should be put in the position of making the choice of do we fix the roof or do we buy textbooks, right? There should be a more carefully planned and strategic look at here's the resources we have, whether they're human resources or financial resources, and we take the budget and we allocate it to the priorities for the students. And so we're recommending that that process not only strategically allocates, but engages the stakeholders in that process when we're thinking about what the needs are and what we need to allocate funds to. The other thing that we noted is that many special schools and programs around the country, in addition to receiving whatever kinds of funds they receive, whether it's state funds, federal funds, they also spend time themselves fundraising, going after grants, looking at additional ways to fund things for students and program enhancements. And so we also will include in the recommendations that the 3 schools should explore that as well, that they have additional funds and not just so dependent on the state funding or on whatever line of funding, Medicaid funding, in the case of LSCC. The second recommendation is that I will talk about is tied to the continuum of educational placements. And so what we know and believe on this team is that these special schools are critical for the students and families they serve. They're absolutely critical, and they must remain a vital place on the continuum. We know that a special ed kid could end up being in their public school district and get some services, or they could end up in a special classroom, or they can end up in a special school, if you will. And all those are important, and no one kid is the same. And while we all have our differing philosophies and beliefs about that, it's important that we protect that continuum. And in this state, we believe that there's need to take that a step further and better articulate, clearly explain, and make sure it's clear to not only internally but externally the value of these schools, because there are incredible opportunities for students to be served here. Additionally, the state should understand that the expertise that's at these schools could also serve to help kids that are not at these schools. So that whole continuum of placement thing is about protecting where they are, but also understanding the role and the context that these schools have and how they can benefit not only the kids here, but all kids. The last area that I'll talk about is staff recruitment and retention. We heard a lot about staff recruitment and retention while we're here. We looked at different statistics, and so we know that there are a lot of things that contribute to why staff want to come to an organization or why they might leave, why they may not stay. So we think that the special school district has to have a comprehensive plan for recruiting the highest qualified staff and for also retaining them. And so that's complex. It's not one thing. So in part of that is making the school attractive from the lens of what do I get if I come here? Compensation, professional development, opportunities for growth, making it a place that people want to be. So as these schools and programs can evolve to become centers of excellence, then that feeds that, right? At the same time, it's not going to happen without doing some strategic things like partnering with universities and institutions of higher ed to make sure that you can offer courses to advance people or to train people. Those of us in this field who've been in it a long time, and I've been in deafness, deafblindness, and blindness for most of my career, every place I've worked, there's always been a challenge in recruiting staff, qualified staff, highly qualified staff, and part of that is because there's a shortage out there. Part of it is there are some maybe local challenges to where people, you have to do a combination. You got to look outside, you got to partner with institutions, but you also have to grow your own. And so we're advocating that the school look at all those options and that they also maybe develop career advancement programs from within, where maybe there's a teacher aide or paraprofessional on here who might want to pursue a degree, and that the system would allow them some support and opportunity to kind of grow and learn. Then you grow some of your professionals from within. They're already here, they know the system. So we're just advocating that in staff recruitment retention, there's a comprehensive plan developed that addresses a clear, attractive package that would bring people here. It also partners with universities to develop those pipelines for people that want to come here. And at the same time, also, you grow some of the things. So that's sort of the high-level review of that recommendation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. The speakers that stand up and talk use the microphone as well as the interpreter. Sure.
Is that better? Hi everyone, I'm Krista McCary from the Cotting School. I just want to echo my colleagues in thanking you for being here tonight to hear our feedback, and we're really excited to see such a wonderful turnout. So I'm going to talk about 3 areas. The first is transition services, and this is something that we heard a lot about from a wide variety of stakeholders, parents and students and staff, really talking about, and community members talking about the importance of transition services, because that's the end goal, right? You want students to leave your schools and go out and have the most independent life possible, being able to meet their personal goals and have as many opportunities open to them as possible after they graduate. So that's what all your hard work as a community is directed toward. And while we definitely saw that there is transition planning happening at each school, what we think would be an important addition, and that would really improve the transition planning for all students, is for SSD to organize a comprehensive district-wide approach to transition planning and transition services. And one way that this could happen is to have a district-appointed transition coordinator, and this person would be able to serve as a resource to the district and to the individual schools. We recognize, of course, that each school is going to need to implement their transition services in a way that makes sense for their unique population. But the idea is that SSD has an opportunity to be a resource to provide guidance, professional development, also to serve as a liaison between the schools and adult services agencies, institutions of higher learning, vocational programs, business members in the community, a wide variety of different opportunities. We heard a lot of feedback that staff would love to have more opportunities for students to practice their independent living skills and their community and vocational skills, so that when they leave, they're best positioned, students are best positioned to be able to pursue as independent a life as possible, and really emphasizing that need that transition planning focus on independence. And that gets to the next set of recommendations, which are around student independence and self-advocacy. And we want to acknowledge, as we start to talk about this, that obviously student safety is the first priority at all of the schools. We want students to be safe at all times. But as educators, we're always trying to find that balance between safety and opportunity. And having too much of one can mean not enough of the other. And so really looking at how are we maintaining a balance where we're keeping students safe, but also providing them with the opportunities that they need to be able to develop independence, because that's really what it's all about, helping students to be independent. So again, we think that SSD has an opportunity here to be a resource and a support to schools. We think that our recommendation is that SSD help each school to reflect on opportunities that they have where students can be more independent, both on campus and also out in the community, so that students are integrating into the community and again in a variety of ways that make sense for that population, but that they're building those independent living and independent skills. Also, to help schools support student self-advocacy, because we want students to have a voice, and we know schools want that as well, and so to find ways to be able to work with students so that their voices can be heard. And then the last finding that I'm going to talk about is around professional school culture. We saw very clearly in every school the level of care and attention and commitment on the part of the staff to the students. This was very obvious. We heard a lot of feedback from parents about that level of care and commitment. Especially in residential programs, we were trying to create a home-like environment for students when they're living on campus. We just have to be very mindful of how we're maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. We heard a lot of folks describe the school environments as being like a family. And again, we want to make sure that we validate and acknowledge how important it is that there be a nurturing, supportive environment. But these are professional relationships that staff have with students, and helping students to understand where those professional boundaries are, not just for their time at school, but in other aspects of their life, so that those boundaries are clear. And again, SSD has an opportunity to help schools develop a code of conduct or standards of professional interactions, training for teachers and other staff, so that those boundaries are clear across all settings.
And I'm going to talk about the last 3 recommendations we have for SSD, and then we'll get into each school. So building on what Krista just said, we think that there's an opportunity for the dorm life and the school life to be better connected. So there's we saw a lack of communication between those 2 entities, and we think that growing that communication could help grow those self-advocacy skills, the transition skills, the academic skills, etc. So we think that there should be some measured response to, some measured response to figuring out a structure of communication. The second thing on my list is security. We, again, agree that, and we know that there needs to be security at LSVI and LSD, and we saw different avenues of how people were managing security, but we did see some lack in your system. So for the emergency system, we did not see a system that included text messaging, video announcements, etc. Now you've come up with workarounds for that, but we are encouraging and recommending that you do have a system that has those pieces in there. And then also some of the buildings have card readers, but some don't. And so we're recommending that they all have the card readers for security purposes. And the last one for SSD, again, is if all of these recommendations are taken into consideration and acted upon, we truly believe that you can become a network of shared expertise. You can become amazingly strong schools. You can take your expertise out into the community, out into the rest of Louisiana, and you can also take it outside of the state altogether. So we truly believe that if you were to work on these recommendations, that you could become this amazing organization. This thing keeps going out. Okay, so now we're going to move into talking about the 3 schools, and then we'll wrap up. Jeff?
Now we're going to talk specifically about LSD. What we observe is that LSD could become a leader in the field of deaf education. They know how to instruct deaf and hard of hearing students using a bilingual approach, which we feel is important. Make sure students can succeed academically, vocationally, or become more independent. Because you're going to deal with students of a wide range, some who have ASL in English, some are oral. How do you serve these students? This school has the expertise and should not only keep it within the school, but should share it around the state. And it's important that the students must come here at a young age. At a later age, they've already suffered language deprivation. And that's a problem. They keep them in district and they place them in a school such as this at too late of an age. You want them to have the right approach, the right pedagogy, and then they can become independent people. And the teachers and the staff that work with the students must have experience in the field of deaf education. And they also must be fluent in American Sign Language, which will help the students acquire language and thrive. I'd like to talk about some of the things that we saw as a team when we came into LSD. The students are so proud. They have a deaf identity. I met with a group of students while I was here. I see a few of them here now. They're able to speak their minds. They're able to explain what they need. And many schools may not have the same type of students, but obviously they were raised correctly, taught correctly, and they know how to advocate for themselves, and that was nice to see. The school leadership teams, the administrators, principals, etc., are truly committed to the students. They want to do what's best for the students and give whatever they can to the students. The staff, the teachers, the parents, counselors, their hearts, they are here for the students and they want to do more for the students. That was evident, very clear. And there's a very strong vocational program here, which you don't see in many schools for the deaf, so that was great to see. That could provide training for some students that will not be going to college, but they will have the tools for a career and to find a job in the school. Now let me talk about some of the findings. Oh, sorry, I forgot about this. This is very interesting, actually. This was in 2014, 2016, 2012, 2014, 2016. Many of the students hadn't decided what they wanted to do after they graduated. And you can see it 34% after that, and then 92% after that. So now it shows that the students have a clear plan about what they want to do after they leave the school, whether it be college, whether it be a career or work. That helps the students know where they want to go, and which also helps them know what type of classes they need that will get them to their goals. Now to talk about some of the findings. School climate. As I said before, the school must have a clear vision where the school is going. If there's no clear vision, people might want to do this, which takes the school in one direction, somebody else wants another direction. But if you have a vision, you have people that are all committed to the same direction, and that will impact the staff morale as well. It will raise the staff morale if everybody has a clear vision. Everyone's looking at the students and what they need, and that's where the vision lies. Also, we've noticed that you have schools that want one thing, the community wants what's best for the school, but the communication between the school and the community doesn't seem to be happening. We feel we need to, outside mediator or someone should help the community and the school come together, because if they can do so, the community will thrive. I mean, we see people here, we see people from the school and the community, and if you were all talking the same language, the school would thrive and be the best school, the state, possibly the nation. The third thing was, and this is standard, you must have a climate survey, a school climate survey, to get the pulse. Because sometimes, you know, one person says this and that's the problem, but do we really understand what the underlying problem is that may be overlooked? So this survey would help identify some of the areas that need to be worked on. This is typical all over the country, but you should undertake this climate climate survey every 2 or 3 years. You bring in a neutral person to do it, and that helps the school make changes to improve the entire environment and the climate of the school. ASL and English bilingual approach. This school obviously is committed to this approach. And there's a consultant, but we have not seen any clear, hard plan that we'll be doing this, that, expectations, level of proficiency needed for teachers and direct staff as opposed to supervising staff or dorm staff. That must be clear. If somebody is hired and they don't have that skill, they need to be supported and given a couple of years to rise to the level, because this impacts student learning. So there needs to be a very strong plan and structure in place to improve people's signing skills. Academic standards. We didn't study this too much because there was a group before us that came, and that was Generation Ready. They did a study at the school, and they had a list of recommendations and what the school is planning to do, and we're in support of that report from Generation Ready. And again, the specific philosophy or the philosophy of the school must be the same, so that the students can become whatever they want to be. If you don't have low expectations, if you have high expectations, they will rise to that challenge. professional development, to make sure that's tied with what the students need to thrive. It should align. Also, an accreditation process, and that's more of a self-study. Another group would come in, study the school, but as part of this process, you have to do a self-study. And they come to validate what you're doing in your school, or maybe tell you what needs to be improved. So we're encouraging you to undergo that process as well. Inclusive education. This is standard. You have academic students and then students here, you call them the Law 1s, who have an alternative assessment. But the Law 1 students feel like they're separated from their peers. There should be some opportunities for those students to interact with the academically balanced students, because we find peer-to-peer learning is much better than teacher-to-student instruction often. A peer can see, well, gee, my friend can do that. I want to challenge myself to do better. And we're not talking all day, but find different opportunities where this peer-to-peer instruction can take place, because we saw a need here for that. And again, this last one ties to the visual language, the staff proficiency. We're suggesting you move from SLPI to the ASLPI sign language assessment. It will assess students and staff. It will create different levels where they should be, depending on whether they're directly interacting with students or not. Because sometimes you ask people, why are you all here? To expose the students to language so they can thrive. Students, when they go home, they don't have that type of exposure to language. And if you don't have the right staff to provide that language exposure, your students will not thrive. So you can always challenge your staff to do better. So that was the general findings and recommendations for the Louisiana School for the Deaf.
So the next set of recommendations will focus on Louisiana.
Where is it?
The next set of recommendations will focus on Louisiana School for the Visually Impaired. And as I start this, I say the same thing Jeff said about the School for the Deaf, that the Louisiana School for the Visually Impaired has potential to be a leader. They have incredible expertise, they have incredible knowledge and understanding of how to uniquely design programs and implement programs that benefit students with visual impairments, and that they need to use that, they need to continue on that path to become the center of excellence, but also then figure out a way to use that to support all students in the state. In our observations, we saw the same thing that Jeff talked about with LSD, was incredibly dedicated, caring, committed staff in these programs with the best intentions to raise the level of outcome for the students. We also saw staff and administrators that really want to grow professionally and become better at what they do. So we commend the school for that. But all schools need to be in the pattern of continuous improvement. And so the recommendations that we're going to share with you, again for LSVR, are in that same vein. We have to be in a continuous model of improvement, constantly looking to get better in ways we can. And so we hope that these recommendations will help the school do that. And before I do that, the chart. Jeff talked about graduation pathways and how in 2014 there was a smaller number of students who had declared a pathway, and we're looking at their future plans. And we've seen at LSVI the same trend, that there's an upward trend, that more and more students are declaring their pathway, and that's a good thing. Now, the next piece is to link that to actual plans to achieve. So on to the next. So school climate was an area again of need at LSVI in terms of assessing the climate of the school. There are lots of things that contribute to climate, and we learned some of those things. And while they may be different in both of the schools, there were some similarities as well. LSVI was merged to here to this campus a few years back. There were some residual feelings about that. There was concerns about compensation, concerns about clarity and communication, and all those things contribute to how teachers and staff feel about the school and how parents feel and how students feel. And so what we learned from listening to students, to listening to the community, parents and staff, is that there needs to be a clear, succinct way to collect their feedback through a climate survey, take that, look at the findings, and then develop an action plan that will allow the school to improve the school climate. And so every couple of years you do that, you keep checking how are you doing along that way. So that's that recommendation. The next recommendation is tied to academic standards. And again, similar to what Jeff said, there needs to be a shared philosophy of all students should be expected to reach their full potential, and that we have high expectations for the students, and that we provide them with rigorous academic standards to allow them to achieve, and particularly at the blind school. That curriculum should also include the expanded core curriculum, which is a curriculum that's been designed specifically for visually impaired students that complements the core curriculum. So the core curriculum is reading, math, writing, all those, science and social studies. But beyond that, blind students, because of their lack of access to certain things with their vision loss, don't get access to incidental learning, to some of the skills and abilities that are typically developed peers may have access to because they have access. So things like independence, self-advocacy, assistive technology, social skills, all those things need to be intentionally developed. And there's what's called the ECC, an expanded core curriculum that needs to be implemented at LSVI as well. Inclusive educational opportunities. I'm not going to repeat everything Jeff said. The same concept. Students that are at different levels cannot be segregated all the time. Research shows that the more you segregate them, the further they fall behind, not the further they... Now, we recognize that students with different learning needs at times may need to be in separate groups in order to help them excel and make progress. But there also have to be opportunities where they're engaging with peers and learning from their peers. And so this recommendation is very much along those lines as well. And then the last area at LSVI was family support. In talking with stakeholders, we think there can be improvement in terms of how families are engaged in the process at LSVI, how there might be parent education offerings for families. I can tell you as a professional for the last 30-some years in deafness, deafblindness, blindness, special ed, as a professional, I've always strived to engage families, make sure we provided things for them to learn, how to navigate, what to do. But now, 3.5 years ago, I had a daughter who was born with visual impairment, and I'm all of a sudden on the other side, understanding what parents really need. And I can tell you what they need is sort of supports, education, and someone to help guide them through the process of figuring out what's best for the students. So we're just advocating at LSVI also think about that in their plan and enhance what they already do for parents.
Okay, like LSD and LSVI, the Special Education Center provides a highly specialized set of services to students with very complex needs and intensive challenges. And the staff there work very hard to meet a wide range of these needs. The Special Education Center has the added dimension of being an intermediate care facility, so they're providing a very high level of medical support, nursing support, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So their programming is very comprehensive and focused on meeting the medical needs of the students so that they can be available for learning. But as with the other schools, there's a real opportunity here to be a leader in this area because there's so much expertise and highly specialized services being provided at the Special Education Center. We saw so many positive things during our visit there. Again, staff that are highly engaged, committed, dedicated to providing services to very complex students. Staff that took a lot of pride in making sure that students had access to a wide range of experiences and opportunities, including leisure and recreation opportunities. And just no matter what the level, the intensity of the level of need, staff worked very hard to provide those supports. And we heard a lot of really strong positive feedback from parents who described the impact that LSAC had had not only on their child, but on them, on their family. Some parents told us that my child would have died if they weren't able to come to LSCC, again, because of the level of care that they needed, and really had a lot of confidence that that care was being provided and their needs were being met. The community members that we heard from value LSCC as a part of that community are very committed to the students and finding ways to support the school. So those things were great to see as well. Some of the opportunities for improvement and findings, again, talking about school climate, a lot of that is very similar to what we heard about for the other schools. I think for LSCC, they have the added dimension of wearing 3 hats. As one staff member described to me, they're a medical care facility, a home, and a school. And really working hard to make sure that those things stay in the appropriate balance. The intensive therapeutic and medical needs of the students can have a tendency to overshadow the educational needs. And so with the school climate survey, they have an opportunity to explore kind of how they're balancing those needs and making sure that they're keeping the level of academic and educational expectations on par with the level of services they're providing in other areas. And that gets to the next finding around academic standards. We think this would be a great opportunity for LSCC to review their curriculum, how they're integrating services, and what academic expectations they have for the range of students that they have there. This includes how therapies are being integrated, how assistive technology is being used as a support to help students have access to the curriculum to the greatest degree possible. Because students there need a lot of adaptations and modifications to be successful. The last finding is around staffing needs to make this happen. We were really struck that the number of therapeutic staff, physical therapists, occupational therapists, and speech-language pathologists does not seem to be sufficient to meet the intensive needs and demands of the students there. The students need lots of care and need an integration of these therapeutic services across their school day and as part of their residential experience. And we really feel that it's important that the school look at and that they have support to have additional therapeutic staffing. We recommend that they do an analysis of their service delivery and their scheduling to see what priority areas they might want to tackle first in terms of additional therapists.
Okay, I have the pleasure of wrapping this up. And just to forewarn you, we have just one more idea and then we'll be open up for your questions or comments. Over here. Okay, so again, we've been saying this over and over, and we believe that if the recommendations are followed, in that the student outcomes will be improved, and that SSD and the 3 schools can become centers of excellence for their students, for the families, for the state of Louisiana, and far beyond. And we truly believe that. And so now we're going to open up for questions. Okay, give us 1 second to get ourselves organized.
Yes, there's a question back there.
I have a
And this
question.
is on recording, so.
Yes. I have a question about, you mentioned that you need staff to be proficient in ASL. What are your recommendations to bring students to be proficient in English, reading, writing, and comprehension? The other one is, you talked about students declaring graduation pathway. Is this school initiated, or is this respond to a statewide push for students to declare graduation pathway? Thank you.
I'm going to answer the first part, and I will give the other people the second part of your question. This really applies to any student with a bilingual background, whether it's Spanish and English, ASL and English, French and English, whatever. You have a strong foundation in your first language, you can acquire a second language proficiently. So for me, I'll just use myself as an example. I was born as a deaf individual. My first language is American Sign Language. I have a very strong foundation. English for me was not difficult to learn. I was able to acquire quite easily. What we see often though with the problems of students, they don't have a strong first language. They're maybe in a public school, they think that they can teach them orally, but they're probably a visual learning. I'm not talking about every student because they're all different. Some students can function orally, but you have to clearly identify what their best modality is after you make that determination. You instruct them in their first language and they can pick up naturally another language. It happens with people who know one language, they acquire a second or third. By the time it's fourth or fifth, it's just a natural learning process to acquire those other languages without requiring really training. They are just able to pick it up. So that's what I mean by making sure that a student gets the right foundation, linguistic foundation, regardless if it be spoken English, written, Spanish, whatever, but make sure that that language is strong, the first language, and the second and third languages will be more easily acquired.
Okay, so for the pathways, I don't actually know. We got that date, that's data we looked at, so we didn't actually talk to people about how those children decided. So I don't have an answer to your question. But I do know that the rise was pretty stark. It's pretty amazing. But again, don't have an answer to your question about how it happened. But the students did sign up. Thank you.
Okay.
Question?
Yes, you mentioned that you wanted higher administration to have leadership expertise. How high are you talking about? Because I believe that the directors of the schools have that expertise. So how high in administration are you talking about?
It should. It should come from the assistant principal all the way up to the special school district administrator. They should have expertise for that population. They really need to. If they're making decisions for these kids, you know, they have to know what the student, who the students are. It's a simple answer and a very direct answer. You have a follow-up question?
Well, I feel like that doesn't exist. And so I was wondering if that was in your recommendations, that the people over the directors should perhaps learn a little more about blindness and deaf education, so forth.
That was our first recommendation. That was the very first one.
The higher.
It is a recommendation. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Can you bring that back up and show it?
Okay.
That was our very first recommendation. Questions? Coming over here?
With these recommendations to the special school district and the state, what guarantee and who do we have that's going to make the state implement these recommendations?
That's not our charge.
Do y'all know who is the main person that you're giving this information to?
The state.
Who in the state?
I'm the superintendent and we were hired by the state.
Yeah.
Who in the state had this done and who in the state is responsible to see that this is fulfilled or attempted to be fulfilled? Who?
So as I said at the beginning of this presentation, they came to town to deliver this information to the entire executive leadership team at the Department of Education, some BESI members, Kathy Adamson, who's here with us again today, and the superintendent of the state, John White, will be delivering a presentation and a plan moving forward at the BESI meeting next week.
So, state superintendent is going to get with the BESI board and they are the responsible parties to see that this is done. That's what I want to know.
Any other questions? Go ahead. was at the Learning Center of the Deaf. And they were the first bilingual school. They started that way back when. So it's a strong program and has been strong. Now I've moved here, and this school did tell me that they were a bye-bye program. But I asked if they did have it, they said they did. So I was excited, and I came to School Hill, and then I realized, no. This is very different here. Their definition of a bilingual program is very different than my view. So it feels very different here than it did with the Learning Center. Now they said that they have this bye-bye program, so I'm just wondering what you saw that might be different than what I saw. Well, the team came and observed, and what we saw that they are committed to a bilingual program. Commitment. They have a consultant from the Kansas school that comes here, Kansas School for the Deaf. But what they don't have here is a plan. They have no plan for the training, for professional development, to raise these employees up to the level where what you had at the Learning Center have here. But they are very committed to the bilingual program. So that's what I'm seeing, just to clarify. Okay, thank you. So I'm wondering, somebody mentioned the fact that there should be parent involvement, that the board, you're talking about the advisory board and having more parent involvement too. I did talk about that very briefly, but the report and the recommendations to state will go in more depth. I don't want to tell you what that's going to look like or make that decision, because that's really the state of Louisiana's decision. But the concept behind it is that we will have the right type of board that has the expertise to advise these people on the board. Should have expertise in deaf education, blind education, and special education. And those people should be serving on the board, who will be advising the State Department of Ed and or the individual schools. But what the board is structured like will be left in the Department of Education.
Yep.
Yes.
Dealing with blind schools, you stated there needed to be more parent participation. Do you have further recommendations other than just that statement that it needs to be done?
Yeah, in our report, there'll be recommendations about things that they might want to consider. And I meant, in the report, there'll be further recommendations, but we said things like parents involved in an advisory group, parents engaged in school committees, have a meaningful voice, that the school be sort of valued as allies, right, in the process. So there'll be some examples, but again, we're not going to dictate. It's different geography. We know it's challenging. You have special schools in one part of the state, so we can't measure it in one way. Oh, parents didn't come to this meeting, therefore we want them involved in the home with their kid. We want them involved in regional advocacy. We want them involved in the school. So there are a variety of ways. The report will expand on that.
But that information is
Will be
in the report. How do we as a parent get a copy of your report?
I'll cover how you access all of it at the end of the meeting, if that's okay.
Other questions?
That was Jamie Wong who just made that comment. Yes.
Hi, my name is Susan Covington. I'm a teacher at LSPI, and I am concerned with the measurement of school progress, of student progress as a school and as a district, especially, I'm familiar with my school. And, how can we fairly assess our children? How can we fairly give them everything that they need when it seems like everything is against them? So, I know that recently some of the charter schools have gotten different rubrics to assess the schools because of their population. And I was just curious, what about, we're 100% population also, do we get that same consideration?
I want to.
Is there a shade that could be drawn or something?
So I want to provide a point of clarification to some had a point of clarification to what you raised, because the point you're talking about is actually something very specific to charter schools. And none of the schools that we are speaking about today are charter schools. And just for very high level context, a charter school is a public school, but just as all three of these special schools are public schools. They, however, have to go through a process to be authorized and be allowed to implement, because they are an independent education agency as well. So what you're speaking to the charter schools having, certain charter schools having a different measurement system, is about the process they go through to be authorized and continue as a charter school. Not about how they are measured in their school performance or any other standard accountability measures. Accountability systems are extremely complex. I know it is something that is very near and dear to the hearts of many of you in this room. It's not, however, a topic, given its complexity, it's not a topic that was something that we charged this group to look at. I do recognize, though, that it is a very important topic. It's a topic on everybody's mind, especially as we begin to implement some of the new ways schools are measured under our ESSA plan, with a heavy emphasis on growth and how students how they may be performing when they enter a teacher's classroom, and looking at how far the teacher would bring them. I just flagged that it's not a topic that this group was charged to address at this particular point in time.
I do agree, but I've noticed that if we are improving schools, that is something that also needs to be addressed in the improvement. I don't think it's a separate issue, and I just wanted to raise that issue.
Yeah.
Because if we keep certain schools separate, whether they're charter, and that's the way they get their charter back again. But the same is true for all students, and not just a certain group.
I would agree, and again, I say that because it's not something we asked this group to look at. It's an extremely important topic. I don't know where Kathy went, not to put her on the spot, but it is a topic that BESI members are very passionate about, and something that we are really exploring right now. It's just a little bit separate from this overall conversation around how comprehensively the schools can look at areas for continuous improvement growth. Is your question on this topic or something for?
No, back to the recommendation that the SSD have properly educated employees that have experience in education with the blind, the deaf, and the multi-handicapped. Should there not also be some parent participation in that SSD in your recommendation, that we should have quite a bit of say as to who is in the SSD? And that they should listen to us, because we, as the parents of these children, know more about what they need than the members of the SSD.
I don't want to speak for their recommendations. I will say what I have heard them say throughout this conversation is ensuring that at every level, at school levels, at school leadership levels, and even just in these conversations, that there are places for communication, that there are places for dialogue for people who are closest to children, including parents, teachers, educators, and also a space where these conversations are happening in a very productive way for both parties. So some of those things were addressed in this report. I'll hand it back over to them if they want to elaborate any more on the types of recommendations around these types of things that they've seen.
I would just like to comment about the advisory board. It does include parents, number one, and number two. Any good school, regardless of whether it's for a public school or deaf or hard of hearing, parents should be engaged in any possible meaningful way that they can. Yes?
I have a question. What are your recommendations while the whole process is taking place? About what happened, what kind of support should these schools or the state offer to districts around the state where they have population of deaf, hard of hearing, blind or deaf-blind? Because our biggest concern is when those kids come through the 3-year-old transition, we don't have experts who know how to assess a deaf child, how to assess a blind child, how to assess a deaf-blind child. So I don't know how long this process is going to take. My question is, what are your recommendations that needs to happen for districts statewide who need this support going through evaluation for 3-year-olds?
So our recommendations and our charge was limited to looking at the 3 special schools. not making recommendations about the districts. But what we did in that is we know, having been in the field a long time, that exactly what you said is necessary. We look at kids coming through the 0 to 3, birth through 3 programs, when we look at students being served in public schools, there needs to be a body of expertise that is applied in those contexts. And we think that if developed appropriately, the SSD and these schools could serve that role, so that they would expand their reach to kids around the state, so that regardless of where the student is educated, they would get what they need. But it wasn't within our purview to say, and we didn't study the districts. Basically, our purview is to look at the schools and say, what role could they play? So you're asking me, what should happen in the districts?
No, my question is not what should happen in the district. My question is, what can these 3 entities do meanwhile, while this change is happening? What they can do to offer support for other districts? Because like you said, it's the state agency that they should be evaluating kids from other districts. Districts who do not have the expertise to evaluate kids. What are your recommendations that this state agency that's supposed to be evaluating others around the state during this transition period while they're trying to figure it out? Or did you even look at that?
We didn't really talk about a transition period. I think what we said is there are bodies of expertise in each of these programs, and that they would need resources and a structure and a model for doing it, because it happens different in different states, but that in order to be consistent with programs that are really evolving to be centers of excellence, then they need to be resources for the state. So I can give you, where I came from in Delaware, the School for the Deaf and Deafblind was called a statewide program for the deafblind. So we serve the students at the school, but we also have teams that help districts evaluate students and implement programs there. I think that, I don't know what model would work in Louisiana, but I think that has to be explored. And we haven't delineated the exact model, but we're making the recommendation that something be done so that you're reaching all kids, not just the kids at the schools. And that should be the role of these schools in a larger context.
And this is more of a long-term recommendation. This particular one is more of a longer-term recommendation because other things have to get into place before it can start branching out. By the way, I love that students are here asking questions. Go ahead.
We heard that the regular classes in high school, the normal classes themselves. Okay, we're looking at the 8th grade level and below. And then there's the honor classes and the high school level. We're curious like me. I'm a senior. Sometimes I'm taking the 8th grade level. Now, when I go to college, is that going to restrict or block my success? Well, because you're the 8th grade level, missing out on college, missing out on the high school level. You mean talking about high school? Oh, all right, let me, here. For education, I'm going to go back to the Generation Ready report. Now, you're looking at the whole system, SSD. The whole system must raise the bar, and that's going to take time. Now, I understand you're going to go to Gallaudet University. That means the school is doing something good right for you, yes? Okay. That means you're going to challenge yourself more. You need to. Now, I have to commend you. That's a success that you're making because you probably grew up having the access to language, right? There's 2 things. My daughter will be going to Gallaudet now. It's a concern that I have. Something was talking about wanting parents more involved, and I agree with that, commend that. Here, we do have a parent-teacher association, a PTA, or, like a birth to 3 group for early intervention. Even when they're just a few months old, they go twice a week, and that's about all they have. And I've been going and meeting hearing parents with infants and interacting with them using an interpreter. But some of these people are not seeing the exposure that they want. That's the word that they're using. There's other deaf people signing So can I choose to put my child in that school or mainstream program? My other concern is parents being more involved, and you want to increase that, but email, text. I mean, we're talking here about this presentation and other organizations too, but LSD, we don't know what's going on. We don't get anything, and we just got some information 2 days ago, so that's a concern. How can parents be more involved if they don't know what's going on? If they find out about things last minute? All right, let me figure out how best to answer your question. Our findings and recommendations are more broad, talking about the general system, but one of the things that need to be developed is what we're calling the strategic priorities for the school. And through that process, it's a good way for parents to become more involved. Then they can provide the feedback, and the school can be able to improve down the road. But that's the process, and like people said, it can't happen overnight. We do appreciate the feedback. We've taken that down and made note of that, and the state people are here to listen to it, and that could be part of the strategic plan, vision, and mission of the school. Because another parent brought up the same issue, the school may need to improve overall on how to engage parents in general. Okay? Thank you. I saw some other questions, yes. We're talking about the state of Louisiana and education. Other states, of course, education as well. Sometimes the students are learning here. Sometimes it just doesn't have students. There's more vocabulary used by hearing people. So how can we change the educational view and make things more deaf-friendly and more visual? Again, I have to go back to our findings. Our findings were that you needed the right type of people in the right places within the system. When that happens, that will help raise the academic rigor because they understand how deaf people learn, how bilingual programs work, and then the academic rigor should change. What was that you said? The system must change first, prior to the school can change. I know you're thinking I'm a senior, it's too late. But your education should actually never stop. Your education continues for life. I heard you're going to a community college next. Good for you. Keep that up. Don't give up because of anything that's happened here. But you can influence a school down the road based on the experience you've had, and you can help the next generation have an improved education. Yes? Okay, we have one more question here, and then we'll look at the other side. Yeah, hang on. I'm lucky that my mom saw the information about this meeting. She took it from the dorm, so come here to this meeting. And I will go back when it's over. But my mom was asked to ask the dorm staff about why the other students were not showing up here at the meeting, because I don't think that's right that they're not here. I mean, why can't those students be involved? They need to know about this meeting. They need to know what needs to be improved. They need to know about it because moving forward they can fight for what they need for more improvement. But the students really don't know. And this could help the process. But they can't help the process because they're not here and they don't know. Thank you for that feedback. I know that you shared the same concern before, and that has been documented and is in the report and part of the findings. How to have these students more involved in the school improvement process. I mean, self-advocacy, self-esteem, all of that is in the report. Everything I heard you all say before, yes. One of your findings or recommendations, you're talking about the vision of the three schools and that they should share one vision. What do you mean by one vision for those three schools? Or would there be different components of the vision? That's one of my concerns, is there would be too much, some person wants too much of this, someone wants something about. Could you speak about the people having the same philosophy or vision and clarify that? somebody else can explain this. I'm going to respond based on my experience. SSD should have its own vision of what they're expecting for the entire organization. And each of the schools should have their own visions as well, because they're all three. By having their own, they would have to develop strategic goals to meet their vision, whatever their vision may be. Maybe all students will become independent citizens, whatever. I'm just making this up. I don't really know. It would depend on the community and what they decided upon. But there should be a large vision for all of the system. And then there should be smaller ones within each of the schools. But you have to develop strategies. You can't have 1,000 strategic goals. That's not possible. You need to bring in the right people to help develop and identify the strategic priorities. Once you have those in place, we call this an SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat. It's a SWOT. It involves teachers, staff, community, parents, and students. Everybody will provide input, and then you'll establish priorities, maybe for the next 2 or 3 years, what you want to achieve. Once that's done, then you go through the process once again, what you would like to improve in the next 3 years, and so you make progress, steady progress. That would be my advice. Continue to make changes to improve, and really it depends on the leaders, which is the reason we made the recommendations that we did. Anybody else like to respond to that? Yes. Who are you pointing to?
The
Nobody.
man in the back.
Yes. Need you.
Just clarification. It was recommended by all of you that the staff and administration and directors of each school should now have more say in their own running of their school, and that the SSD should listen to them and not be fully in charge?
I want to,
Well, maybe that's not how I should have said it.
I think that's too,
I'm saying that you said they should have more input as to what goes on.
I can agree with that, but I don't
Make
want
more
to,
decisions as far as what's going on their campus without having to go through 4 different bosses to get the answer that they already know.
yes, but not, I mean, I don't want to say that that's a formula that they have to follow.
I'm
There's
just
got to
saying,
be,
but you did recommend that these personnel should be consulted, and their opinions and their
those
information-
closest to the school, those closest to the student should be making more decisions
more
around the
decisions
students.
than the SSD is. Or they should be included with the decisions that the SSD is making. Their information.
You're being absolute. I don't want to be absolute about this.
No, I'm just saying, are you recommending that what they say and what they're doing should be considered by those higher ups in the SSD, that they should listen to the staff of the schools a little bit, and the Bessie Board? Maybe should listen to the administration?
We're saying that the decision should be closer to what the actions are that those decisions will impact. We're also saying that there should be advisory outside of the whole school system, I mean SSD in the schools,
Okay.
to support effective decision-making also, and informed decision-making.
Okay, I missed the advisory board statement. Okay, I'm good now.
Yeah, we have recommended that there be an advisory mechanism of some sort that's outside of SSD and the 3 schools to guide, advocate for SSD, the schools, and to LDOE.
Someone to advocate for the school.
A group
A group to advocate for the
or
schools.
group,
To
people.
the state.
Somebody that's an entity, a mechanism, and it can happen in a number of different ways, that has the expertise that's needed to support the leaders, the schools in the state, and an SSD in the schools.
A separate entity from the state and from the school and from the SSD.
A separate entity, I'm not sure how to map it with the school, but it's separate, yes.
Yes. And that the the staff is more, the staff should have more input than the director. They should have more input, they should be considered more by the state and the SSD. They're here with these students all day, every day.
More questions? Oh. One question here and one question.
Okay, I do have one question, Bessie and our state. We want to be accountable to our curriculum and our standards, but we also need to be teaching the expanded core. And how do those two mesh so we can give our students the best possible education? You know, getting everything that they need for life, and as well as the curriculum, because the curriculum is pretty stringent and straightforward. This is what you must do. How do we get the blend?
That's a great question, and it's a pretty complex question. And every school for the blind or visually impaired that is trying to implement the ECC faces some of those challenges because the academic rigor and state accountability systems leaves many places focused so much on the core academics that the other stuff gets lost. And so I don't think there's one formula, but there are ways that people get at it. So let's just use an example. I come from American School for the Blind, and we established what's called an ECC forum, which is made up of teachers who took on the responsibility to start sharing their expertise and ideas for how the ECC could be implemented in the classroom, during the math class, during a science class, during how do you embed it in the academic classes, as well as how do you look at outside of classroom time to embed it. So there are times it can be implemented within the residential program. There can be times it's implemented within after-school programs. That we shouldn't see this something separate that we have to figure out, that it should be embedded, and that those skills are part of the classroom. So if you're developing social skills, which is part of the ECC, social skills can be developed in math, they can be developed in English class. There are different ways to kind of embed them. So it's taking time and giving teachers time to get together and think about that and look at different ways of doing it, and then planning intentionally how you embed it in not only daily instruction, but then in every other opportunity. It can't just happen in one place or as an isolated item. So there are lots of different ideas about how to do it, but I think that what we're saying is the team has to get together and think about how does that happen, because there's no magical way to create more time to do it, right? So it's how do you get the support and guidance necessary to figure out how you as an English teacher or you as a science teacher might figure out, oh, I can see how I can implement that here. Oh, this is what it might look like here. And I would say talk to different schools for the blind and visually impaired that are doing it, and it's not all going to be the same, but everyone will have different ideas. So it's a complex issue, but it's absolutely necessary for our students.
I have a question, actually I have two questions. I don't know about the other two, LSVI and LSEC. I'm not sure about those other two schools, but LSD, School for the Deaf, I've been here. BR comes to help with transition to college. Most of the time it's transition to college. How often should these people be meeting with the VR, with the students, VR meeting with the students? Do they do it just once and it's done? Do they meet every few months? I can't really respond about Louisiana, but I know transition plans need to start at age 14, or at the federal level they require at age 16, they start that planning. So that's a federal mandate. The state of Connecticut, we start at the age of 14, but let's talk about the age of 16. So that's when the transition discussion should happen. During that discussion, and also it needs to be involved and come up in the PPT meeting too, because that's part of the process. It requires a discussion with the VR counselor. But the PPT, it should be mentioned, I can't be specific because it's Louisiana, but that was one of our findings and recommendations to enhance the transition process here for all 3 schools. So that's in the recommendation. Well, how often should they meet with the VR counselor? I really can't respond to that because each school varies and it varies by state. They all have different rules. But what we have found and what we've recommended is a stronger transition program for all of the 3 schools, meaning the schools need to improve in that area. Yes. That will be the last, this will be the last one. I'm going to record this. This is being recorded. I graduated in 1991. The teacher and staff, we had 3 different classes. 1 academic, 1 combination class, and a vocational training class, plus a mainstream program. And that was in the academic program. Now I'm seeing in your recommendations it includes an improvement. So will it be possible for them to have those 3 categories back to improve the deaf teachers? Because some of the hearing people have the intelligence to go to the mainstream program, and that would help the students as well to develop their language. Again, I need to back up and say that we had findings and recommendations, and the recommendations is to increase the academic rigor. But that has to start at the higher structure. Once that change is made, then the academic rigor will follow. So it's still at a higher level that the change needs to start. Okay, yes, Jamie.
So I want to just acknowledge we are over our time that we had scheduled with all of you tonight. I've seen a handful of people have to leave and want to be respectful of the fact that you all probably have families that you need to get home to. So I wanted to give you sort of a little bit of understanding of what happens next as a result of this. I first, again, want to thank all of you for not only coming out tonight, but asking the critical questions, continuing to push this conversation forward, and hope that you understand that this is something that at the department level, I don't want to speak for Bessie, but I know we have a Bessie member here, but at Bessie as well, this is something we were all very committed to continuing to have conversation with, about continuing to move forward and really making sure that what these experts and our team here is recommending that we put into practice, and we really do make these 3 schools centers of excellence for our students who attend these environments, but also students who could benefit from these services in a much greater way across the state. I thank them for coming down again. They've come down once, which was what we asked them to do in the review, but they felt it very important to come down and share this information with the department directly, but also make sure we have these opportunities for our community members, for our school leaders, to hear this directly from them as the experts as well. So we thank them for coming back to Louisiana again. We thought they were coming back to warmer weather. For us, this is cold, but I think from where they are in the Northeast, this is July. So we're thankful for them being here. Like I said in the beginning of this presentation, there is a lot of information. I'm sure all of you will go home and still have 100 more questions that have come to your mind as you continue to digest this. We are still in that same place. We will be going, like I said, to the Bessie board next week on Monday in their academic goals committee, which should begin around 12:30. It is a public meeting. It is in the Claiborne building in downtown Baton Rouge. The public meeting means anybody is welcome to attend and participate as a member of the public and hear that information. Let me teach a second. The superintendent, John White, at that point in time, will give a presentation to the Bessie board of what we have learned throughout this process and what we think we can do as a state to begin to implement these recommendations that were brought forth throughout this process. In order for you to access this information, so the way all of the Bessie information is available is through an electronic system. It's called Board Docs. If you go to the Bessie website, you will be able to look at the agenda for Monday's meeting, and tomorrow afternoon, all of the materials, the findings and recommendations that were submitted to the department, the PowerPoint that you saw today will be uploaded in that system, and you can directly download it. If it's easier, we could probably share a link with the schools to share with your teams. or you can just directly access it. But it will be available in the Bessie materials, like all public materials are available. Do you have a question for me?
Yes. Granted, okay, we get the information from the, but there are actual recommendations other than this in general. How do we access and can we get a copy of the full report that these people did for you?
Yep, that's what you'll be able to download from this system.
Also, why is the Bessie Board meeting at 12:30 on a Monday afternoon when the parents and the staff have to be at work? Have
The
y'all
meeting-
considered having meetings in the evening, calling a special meeting for the parents that can attend? Strictly from these 3 schools, not in general statewide. I mean, y'all have to give us a little more consideration. We're not able to come and listen and talk to you at 12:30 on a Monday afternoon with, let's see, what is today, Wednesday? That's not enough notice. You got to understand, the parents of the majority of these students live statewide. You as the state and as the Bessie Board need to think and consider the parents, where they live, what time of day, and the lack of notice. This meeting was called with what, 2-day notice? No, that's like this town meeting was called with a 2-day notice when we moved onto this campus. The state and the Bessie Board have got to get a better grip on this. I want somebody to get it together because y'all are not doing us any good and you're not doing what these people are recommending by having Monday meetings at 12:30 in the afternoon with a 2-day notice to the parents.
We'll certainly take that into consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you all again very much for coming out tonight. I hope you all have a very safe drive back to wherever your destination may be, and we look forward to continuing to work together with you.
This has been a presentation of the Louisiana Department of Education, copyright 2018, all rights reserved. For more information or to contact the Louisiana Department of Education, on the web go to www.louisianabelieves.com or call 1-877-453-2721.